Sup everyone, welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be talking about Elisa Lam. And if you're not familiar with her, she was a 21-year-old Canadian student who was visiting downtown LA. She was staying at a hotel where she was reported as missing. So she was reported as missing on January 31st, 2013, and nobody knew where she was for like 2 or 3 weeks. So finally, on February 19th, a maintenance worker came down and checked the water tank on the roof because of complaints of dirty water. And when he opened the tank, he found her dead body. There's still some doubt as to how exactly she died, but there are a lot of clues left for us to look at. Let's start out by looking at footage where she was last seen. And this footage takes place in the elevator of the hotel she was staying at. So the footage is a little unsettling, but it does give us a lot of clues. Let's consider each of the possibilities. The first possibility is murder. Somebody at the hotel, probably a hotel worker, was stalking her, avoiding surveillance footage, and took her to the roof where he threw her into the water tank and killed her. Another possibility is that it was an accident. She somehow ended up in the water tank by accident. A third possibility is suicide. She intentionally committed suicide by drowning herself in the water tank. And two other possibilities are paranormal happenings or demonic possession. And if you actually believe the latter two happened, get that paranormal activity bullshit out of here. I just can't take those seriously. Like, I can't sit here and tell you to pause the video at 38 seconds and look at a white silhouette and tell you it's a ghost. Like, no. Out of the three possibilities, I think the one that is very likely is that it was an accident. And the reason I say that is because I think Elisa Lam had bipolar disorder. And that's evidenced by the fact that her family stated she did. We can see signs of that in the video. If you go back to the video, you can see evidence that she's having a manic episode, which are signs of bipolar 1 disorder. So a manic episode, you have lots of symptoms are possible, but in the video we can see that she's in a high energy and excited state, You can see her hand movements. She's making some gestures that seemingly have no purpose. She seems to be talking, and people in a manic episode feel pressured to speak. So there are a lot of signs here that point to her having a manic episode. Earlier, her roommates did say that she was exhibiting odd behavior, and they had to switch rooms. So a manic episode, it doesn't just last for like 5 minutes. It usually lasts for greater than a week, and if untreated, it can even last for months. If she was being stalked by someone, it's reasonable to say that she would only be having this behavior in the middle of the night when she feels like she's getting stalked. But if she's acting like this throughout the day, then it's probably a manic episode. I'd be very interested to see elevator footage of Elisa Lam earlier in the day. And if she still exhibited these signs of an excited state, then that would be a lot of evidence to show that it was a manic episode and it wasn't just someone chasing her in the middle of the night that caused her to act oddly in the video. She also might be showing signs of psychosis, so she might be hallucinating, she might be hearing things or seeing things that aren't there. In the video, she seems to be talking or gesturing to someone out in the distance. That might just be a visual hallucination, but it's hard to say either way. And further evidence that she had bipolar disorder are the medications she was taking that are listed on her autopsy report. So let's get to the autopsy report right now and see what we can figure out. Alright, so here's the autopsy report. And a couple of things that we can quickly note. Drowning was the cause of death. So if it was a murder, it would probably have another cause like blunt force trauma, or she was strangled, and then her body was disposed of through drowning. The fact that drowning itself is the cause of death is more evidence that it was an accident. Of course, it could still be a murder, but less likely. We can also see that there was no trauma on the body. So if there was even any sort of struggle, you could at least expect like defensive wounds on Elisa Lam's body. But the fact that there was none, again, is more evidence towards an accident than a murder. They found her body, she didn't have her clothes on, and the clothes were right next to her. And this could be evidence of a rape and then murder, but again, if you think about it, that doesn't make too much sense. If there was an intelligent murderer who knew how to avoid all the surveillance cameras, who knew how to get onto the roof without triggering an alarm, who knew exactly how to avoid all the witnesses, why would they leave such obvious DNA evidence, or possibly DNA evidence, on clothes? Why wouldn't you just take those clothes and burn them or something? And it has been noted that people with bipolar disorder do sometimes take their clothes off and put them back on. So this could just be a sign of bipolar disorder. Before we get into the specific drugs she was taking, I want to explain bipolar disorder a little bit and its medications so you can better understand what we're going to be looking at. So with bipolar disorder, I kind of think of it as waves. So you have highs and lows. So when you have highs, you have manic episodes, like what she had in this video. You can also have lows, so those are depressive episodes. Antidepressants usually work by inhibiting the reuptake of either serotonin, norepinephrine, or dopamine. And think about it, if you inhibit their reuptake, they stay around for longer, so they exert their effects. So that boosts you up. For depressive episodes, you want to give an antidepressant. And when somebody has a manic episode, you want to bring them back down. So the way you bring them back down is with an atypical antipsychotic. And the mechanisms are kind of unclear, but they mostly block dopamine receptors. So they're D2 antagonists. There's also mood stabilizers, and you can kind of think of that as the waves becoming less frequent and maybe less high and low. So remember, an atypical antipsychotic blocks dopamine and drops you down, while an antidepressant does the opposite and brings you up. So that's a simple way of looking at bipolar disorder and its medications. Here are her list of medications. So she was taking Advil, okay. She was taking dexedrine spansule, which is a stimulant. And there are some studies that show that stimulants are associated with inducing mania. She was also taking lamotrigine, and lamotrigine is a mood stabilizer. So remember, lamotrigine suppresses your mood cycling. She was taking quetiapine, and quetiapine is an atypical antipsychotic. So remember, quetiapine, when you have those manic episodes, you want to give quetiapine. Sinutab is just a cold and flu medication, not really related to what we're talking about. And venlafaxine. So venlafaxine is an antidepressant. Specifically, it's a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. So remember, you have, with antidepressants, they usually act on serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine, or a combination of them. So an SNRI, serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, you can kind of guess which of the two neurotransmitters are affected. Wellbutrin is just the brand name for bupropion, and bupropion is an atypical antidepressant. So remember, as an antidepressant, it's got to block one or a combination of serotonin, norepinephrine, or dopamine, usually. So with this, bupropion blocks reuptake of dopamine and norepinephrine. Usually antidepressants have some involvement with serotonin, but this is one of the cases where it doesn't. So these are the specific medications she was on. So she has antidepressants, she has a mood stabilizer, she has an atypical antipsychotic. Let's compare that with what we typically treat bipolar disorder with. And that is lithium, valproic acid, carbamazepine, lamotrigine. So those are all mood stabilizers, and also atypical antipsychotics. So mood stabilizers and atypical antipsychotics are usually used to treat bipolar disorder. So she had the mood stabilizer, she had the atypical antipsychotic, she was also on antidepressants, and you can treat bipolar disorder with antidepressants, but there is a little bit of contention about that. Now let's go over the post-mortem toxicology results, and a couple things that you should keep in mind before we move on. So first, some drug basics. So every drug has a half-life, and a half-life is basically the amount of time it takes for half of the drug to be removed from the body. So after one half-life, you would have 50% of the drug. After two half-lives, you would have 25%. After three, 12.5%. And usually after 4 or 5 half-lives, the drug stops having its therapeutic effect. The body is metabolizing these drugs, but when you die, technically your body stops functioning and metabolism should stop. But there is some things complicating that. There is some residual metabolism. There's bacteria that are breaking down some drugs. The drugs are being redistributed around the body. So things get really complicated, and the more I looked into it, the more confused I got. So you have to be really cautious with interpreting post-mortem toxicology results. Third thing to keep in mind is that where the sample was taken matters. So if you have, for instance, in this case, she had samples taken from the heart and the liver. The heart is a good indicator of what was in her blood at the time she died. So that's the best indicator of that. The liver, because drugs are metabolized in the liver, you might have a higher concentration of drugs there, but those findings can be difficult to interpret. With all of that background, let's get into reading the results. So first, let's look at bupropion. So the half-life of the drug is 21 hours, almost a day, and it was not found in her system, but the metabolites were, and we'll get to the metabolites in a second. But I don't think that she took the drug on the day she died, because you can imagine if she took the drug, she'd have 50% or more of the drug in her body when she died, according to the half-life. And I don't think, even though it's been 19 days since she died, I don't think post-mortem metabolism or something would eliminate all traces of the drug from her body. But interestingly, bupropion metabolites, many of them have the same function as the drug itself. So the metabolites can also have antidepressant effects. So keep that in mind. Venlafaxine, the antidepressant SNRI, was present in her blood. So the half-life of the drug is 15 hours. So whether or not she took it on the day she died or around the day she died, she still had that circulating in her system when she had that manic episode. So again, keep that in mind. Quetiapine is interesting. So it's the atypical antipsychotic, and it has a half-life of 6 hours. So let's assume she took the drug on the day that she died. And if she took it in the morning, around 2 half-lives would have passed between morning and the time that we see in the footage, which is around 12 at night. So that would leave 100 to 50 to 25% of the drug left in her body at the time she died. And I'm not an expert in how the drug is metabolized after death, but I don't think that we would expect zero concentration not present in the toxicology result if there's 25% of it left at the time of death. So she probably did not take it on the day she died. Now let's assume she took the drug the day before her death. Remember, the therapeutic benefits of a drug last for 4 to 5 half-lives. So for quetiapine with a half-life of 6 hours, it would be approximately 24 to 30 hours. So from yesterday morning to the next day at night, that is well over 24 to 30 hours. So quetiapine, the atypical antipsychotic, was probably not exerting its effects in the video that we see. And lastly, we have lamotrigine. Remember, lamotrigine is the mood stabilizer, and it has a half-life of 37.4 hours. The quantity was not sufficient to determine if it was in her blood, but it was found in her liver. And those findings are pretty complex to interpret, so I'm just going to leave that as a question mark. Interpreting if a drug was having an effect on her at the time of death based on the liver findings is pretty complex. So what drugs were affecting her the day she died? So remember, she's having a manic episode in the bipolar disorder wave. So if she has a manic episode and she's given an antidepressant, which brings you up on this imaginary graph, that is not a good thing. You want to give antidepressants when you're down here. And so she's taking bupropion metabolites. There's venlafaxine in her system, another antidepressant. Quetiapine is an atypical antipsychotic that blocks dopamine receptors. So that'll bring her back down. But that was not affecting her body based on what the calculations we did here. So she's taking 2 antidepressants when she's having a manic episode, and it's unclear of whether or not she is taking her mood stabilizer. So that is just a recipe for disaster. Here's what I think happened. Elisa Lam had bipolar 1 disorder. She was not adhering to her medications correctly, which either exacerbated or induced her manic episode. During her manic episode, in the middle of the night, she made her way to the roof, and possibly thinking someone was chasing her or pursuing her just like she was hiding in the elevator, she made her way to the water tank and climbed in. While she was in the water tank, she took her clothes off, and that's the way her body was found. Let's go over the counter arguments because I know there's probably going to be several. So let's see, the footage was tampered with. So there is a brief snippet of the footage that I showed you guys that is removed, but that could honestly be for a lot of different reasons. It could be some motion sensor thing. It could be maybe it was just deemed not important and it was cut out. It could be a hotel worker or the murderer or someone walking by there. But again, the fact that there's no witnesses and no account of that, I find that a little far-fetched. Getting to the roof triggers an alarm. Well, there's multiple explanations for that. I think there's multiple ways to get to the roof. So I think that's already been debunked. Some people are wondering how she opened the lid to the water tank. The answer is she just did. It wasn't that heavy. Is it a possibility that she committed suicide? Well, bipolar disorder patients do have increased risk of suicide, but that is more during the depressive episodes than the manic ones. But it is still a possibility. But also the fact that that's the way she chose to kill herself, by drowning in a water tank. Why not just jump off the roof? Or why not, take overdose on medications or something? It just seems like a very odd way to commit suicide. Also, there are reports that she was buying gifts for when she returned home, so it's probably unlikely. The only other possibility is it was a murderer, and the murderer was intimately familiar with the hotel and how to get onto the roof, how to avoid surveillance cameras, avoid witnesses, and he kindly took Elisa Lam to the roof and gently told her to go into the water tank, and she complied without a struggle. That's the only other possibility, but a lot of things just don't add up. Alright, so that was a more scientific approach to uncovering this mystery. I think it's mostly resolved. There is a small possibility it was a murder, but again, all the evidence is pointing towards one way and not the other. So I encourage everyone to just focus on the facts. And I know sometimes you want it to be a murder, you want it to be something greater, but the facts just aren't pointing there. Hopefully we also learned a little bit of psychiatry. This was actually really interesting to me because we're currently studying psychiatry at my school. I'm a med student if you're new to the channel. And lastly, we need to stop making psychiatric illnesses out to be some kind of work of the devil. I see this way too often, and we need to focus more on learning about and educating ourselves on psychiatric illnesses rather than immediately jumping to the supernatural or something. But anyways, I hope you had fun with this video. I know I did. I know I learned a ton. This video actually took me 2 days to film. Yesterday there was just so much information. I had to condense it and clean it up, and it's still a lot, but I tried my best. Anyways, with that said, take care, and if you want to see more videos like this, like another mystery uncovered by medicine, let me know, and thanks for watching. See you next time.